The teacher forces a student to solve a difficult equation without knowing he's a genius. Welcome to our channel. Before we begin, please give us a like and subscribe so we can continue creating stories like this. The bell rang loudly across the corridors of Redwood High School, marking the start of a new academic year brimming with possibilities. Students hurried from one class to the next, clutching fresh notebooks and glancing anxiously at their timetables, eager to settle into their new routines. Among them was a quiet, unassuming boy named Oliver, whose eyes flickered with a subtle mixture of nervousness and curiosity. He walked with measured steps, careful not to draw attention to himself, preferring to blend into the background rather than stand out. In his previous school, Oliver had been teased for his soft-spoken nature, his analytical way of thinking, and his fascination with mathematics. Little did anyone know that beneath his timid exterior lay a mind capable of unraveling the most challenging puzzles with remarkable ease. His parents, both busy professionals in scientific fields, had always encouraged his passion for numbers, but they never pushed him to display his talents publicly. For Oliver, the walls of the school hallway felt like a protective barrier, shielding him from unwelcome attention and allowing him to observe quietly from the sidelines. He found comfort in routines, in the predictability of classroom schedules, and in the slow, steady march from one subject to another. Meanwhile, in room 203, a mathematics teacher named Mr. Thompson was preparing for his first day with a fresh batch of students. Mr. Thompson was known throughout Redwood High for his rigorous teaching style and unwavering insistence on discipline. His lessons were challenging, often leaving unprepared students struggling to keep up or longing for simpler exercises. However, he prided himself on his ability to cultivate excellence, believing that the only way to succeed was through consistent hard work and occasional doses of tough love. He despised lateness, frowned upon half-hearted efforts, and seldom accepted excuses for failure, no matter how seemingly valid. As Oliver quietly slipped into the classroom, Mr. Thompson scanned the room, quickly sizing up each new face with a discerning gaze. In that single moment, the teacher formed countless snap judgments, rating each student's potential before they had even touched a pencil. He noticed Oliver's reserved demeanor and presumed him to be an average student, if not someone who might struggle under pressure. Mr. Thompson launched into his introduction, boasting about the rigors of advanced algebra and calculus that his students would soon confront. He spoke with an air of authority, pacing across the front of the room, occasionally stopping to scrutinize each pair of eyes that followed him. Oliver tried to listen intently, yet he found his thoughts drifting to equations he had studied over the summer, quietly testing out new methods in his head. When Mr. Thompson announced that math would require unwavering dedication and hours of practice, Oliver nodded along politely, secretly confident he could meet the challenge. He knew he possessed an extraordinary gift, but he was determined to keep it hidden, having faced enough negative attention in the past. Unbeknownst to his classmates, Oliver had spent countless evenings poring over advanced mathematical journals, drawn in by the intricate patterns and intellectual beauty within each proof. His appetite for knowledge was insatiable, yet he feared that revealing the full extent of his abilities might alienate him from his peers. Mr. Thompson, meanwhile, concluded his speech by asserting that he would not tolerate laziness or excuses, ending with a dramatic warning that those who faltered would be called out. There was a solemn hush in the classroom as the teacher's words sank in, and Oliver could feel a slight tension gripping the air. He reminded himself to remain invisible, to play the role of the diligent but ordinary student, and not to draw undue attention. All around him, students exchanged nervous glances, silently acknowledging the gauntlet that had been thrown down by their formidable instructor. Mr. Thompson reached for a stack of syllabi and, while distributing them, issued a swift yet pointed reminder that tardiness and incomplete homework would not be tolerated. His voice carried an undercurrent of warning, suggesting he had witnessed his fair share of laziness and had no patience left for such behavior. Oliver accepted his syllabus with a polite smile, carefully skimming the pages and noting the accelerated curriculum they would tackle. He felt a spark of excitement rise within him, a sense of thrill that he would soon be delving deeper into the abstract realms of mathematics. Nevertheless, he vowed to keep his composure, remembering all too well the times he had been singled out for excelling beyond what was expected. Before he could let his mind wander further, Mr. Thompson turned sharply toward the whiteboard, his marker squeaking as he wrote a series of numbers and variables in a neat row. The teacher explained that throughout the year, the class would build the skills necessary to tackle problems like the one scrawled on the board. Oliver's pulse quickened, for even at a glance, he recognized the equation was not just complex but elegantly crafted, hiding deeper mathematical truths. He told himself to stay calm, to let Mr. Thompson set the pace, and not to stand out by solving it too quickly in his head. Yet in that moment, he could feel his brain surging with excitement, already formulating potential approaches and rearranging terms to see patterns invisible to others. Mr. Thompson, oblivious to the internal fireworks taking place in Oliver's mind, believed he was simply staring at another reluctant student who might quiver at the sight of advanced equations. Little did he know that the wheels had already begun turning, and that soon Oliver's unassuming presence would reveal a brilliance none of them could have anticipated. As the first few weeks of the semester progressed, Mr. Thompson's reputation for demanding excellence only intensified. He peppered each lesson with tricky worksheets, pop quizzes, and challenges that forced his students to think beyond standard textbook methods. For most of the class, these tasks felt like insurmountable walls, leading to collective groans and desperate glances at the clock. Yet, Oliver maintained his quiet composure, discreetly breezing through problems that left others scratching their heads, though he took care to mask the extent of his ability. Occasionally, Mr. Thompson would notice Oliver's work, raising a suspicious eyebrow at the unassuming student who seemed to finish everything a bit too quickly. However, Oliver always managed to hide the swiftness of his solutions by pausing, pretending to recheck his work, and fiddling with his pencil before turning in assignments. Part of him wished he could show the class just how much he loved these mathematical riddles, but he was unwilling to invite the kind of attention that might paint him as an outcast. In an effort to gauge his students' progress, Mr. Thompson devised a complex algebraic puzzle that pulled together all the concepts taught so far. Written in bold letters across the top of the handout was the term extra credit, a label that made more than a few pupils shake their heads in resignation before they even began. The puzzle was a tapestry of nested fractions, cryptic expressions, and carefully concealed patterns, the sort of intellectual labyrinth that would usually require hours of persistence. Oliver gazed at the paper with calm intensity, feeling his mind ignite with excitement at the potential for creative problem-solving. He reminded himself not to rush, so as not to attract undue suspicion. Instead, he methodically worked through each step, rewriting the problem in his neat handwriting, breaking it down into approachable segments. While other students sighed and shifted in their seats, Oliver found himself fully immersed in the geometry of the equations, losing track of time as he tested out potential pathways. In his head, entire universes of numbers whirled, forming shapes and connections that clicked together with the satisfying precision of a jigsaw puzzle. Mr. Thompson prowled the aisles, stopping at each desk to peer at the scrawls of algebra and fractions. When he arrived at Oliver's table, he couldn't help but notice the boy's calm demeanor and neat solutions. Suspicion prickled in the back of his mind, for it was rare to see such organization and speed from a student who rarely spoke in class. Still, Oliver had taken the precaution of leaving some steps half-finished, making it appear as though he was still grappling with the problem. Once Mr. Thompson moved on, the boy filled in the blanks rapidly and double-checked his reasoning, ensuring there was no arithmetic slip that might give him away. He then quietly handed in his paper, placing it at the bottom of the small stack on the teacher's desk to avoid drawing attention. Even though Oliver had taken pains to appear ordinary, Mr. Thompson's curiosity was piqued. Over the next few days, he began scrutinizing Oliver more closely, inspecting every assignment for signs of guesswork or inconsistency. Each time, he found the student's work to be thorough and correct, leading the teacher to wonder if Oliver was one of those rare individuals who simply got it without the usual struggle. One afternoon, Mr. Thompson announced that he would be returning the graded extra credit puzzles. Most students held their breath, hoping they had gleaned at least a few points from the formidable challenge. Oliver, on the other hand, felt his heart rate pick up slightly, uncertain if his thoroughness might have betrayed his true genius. One by one, Mr. Thompson called students to his desk, handing back papers with brief comments or succinct remarks. Whispers filled the room when it became apparent that nearly all of them had missed critical steps, earning more red ink than they had expected. Finally, Mr. Thompson called Oliver to the front. With a measured tone, the teacher informed him that his solution was unusually thorough and impeccably reasoned, awarding full marks along with a quiet stare. The entire class, already demoralized by the difficulty of the puzzle, watched as Oliver mumbled a grateful response and hurried back to his seat. Unaware that he might have revealed too much, Oliver allowed himself a momentary sense of pride before forcing his face back into its usual neutral expression. Mr. Thompson, meanwhile, was left with a nagging suspicion that there was more to Oliver than met the eye, a thought that would soon drive him to test the boy in ways no one could have predicted. The following week brought a storm of unrelenting difficulty to Mr. Thompson's lessons, as if he had decided to challenge the entire class beyond the usual curriculum. The teacher dove headlong into advanced topics, sprinkling in complicated theorems and algebraic manipulations that typically belonged in higher-level courses. Students found themselves drowning in nightly homework, many of them meeting in makeshift study groups to survive the deluge. Despite the collective struggle, Oliver quietly excelled, completing practice problems in record time. He spent his evenings double-checking his work just to maintain the facade of normalcy, reminding himself that he couldn't afford to stand out too quickly. Still, during class, Oliver's concentration was evident. Whenever Mr. Thompson scrawled an equation on the board, Oliver's eyes lit up and his pencil danced nimbly across the page. What Oliver couldn't predict was just how much Mr. Thompson's gaze lingered on him. The teacher had been teaching at Redwood High for over a decade and had encountered bright students before, but there was something distinct about Oliver's quiet brilliance. Unlike other high performers who asked frequent questions or boasted of their achievements, Oliver stayed in the background, avoiding any limelight. That contrast only deepened Mr. Thompson's intrigue, propelling him to find the perfect opportunity to test his boy's mettle in a public arena. Late one afternoon, as the class was packing up, Mr. Thompson called Oliver to stay behind. Heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and curiosity, Oliver walked to the teacher's desk while the rest of his classmates filed out. In a calm but firm tone, Mr. Thompson expressed his observations, mentioning Oliver's consistent accuracy and diligence. He asked the boy directly if he found the material too easy, but Oliver insisted that the work challenged him plenty, offering a polite smile. Mr. Thompson then proposed an idea. He was organizing a small after-school math club and invited Oliver to join, implying that it could provide an extra push for someone of his natural abilities. Attempting not to appear suspicious, Oliver accepted with a shrug, saying that he enjoyed numbers and wouldn't mind the extra practice. However, part of him panicked, worried that he was stepping onto a stage where all eyes would be upon him. As the teacher jotted down details of the meeting, Oliver wondered if he should intentionally perform at a slightly lower level to avoid drawing too much admiration, or worse, jealousy, from peers. When Oliver mentioned the math club to his parents that evening, they were torn between pride and concern. They knew their son was extraordinarily gifted, yet they also understood the social implications of standing too far ahead of his classmates. His mother suggested maintaining balance, practicing a bit of modesty while still nurturing his talent. His father, however, voiced the opinion that Oliver shouldn't hide his gift forever, especially not if he wanted to advance to more serious competitions or scholarship opportunities. Torn, Oliver listened politely without fully committing to either perspective. That night, his mind whirled with possibilities, excitement tempered by an undercurrent of fear. He knew Mr. Thompson's watchful eye could become a double-edged sword. one that might either propel him to new heights or expose him in ways that left him vulnerable to criticism. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson found himself increasingly convinced that Oliver was no ordinary student. He began recounting Oliver's progress to a colleague in the faculty lounge, describing how the boy never asked for help, rarely made careless mistakes, and submitted work that looked like it came from someone well beyond his grade level. The colleague, a physics teacher, suggested that perhaps Oliver had private tutoring or came from a family of mathematicians. When Mr. Thompson mentioned that Oliver's parents were scientists, the colleague merely nodded, explaining that sometimes intellectual brilliance was simply in the genes. Yet Mr. Thompson didn't accept that explanation so easily. He believed that real genius often manifested in intangible ways that even the best tutors couldn't replicate. The teacher decided right then that he needed a definitive proof of Oliver's abilities, something that would either confirm his suspicion or lay it to rest. Thus, the stage was set for Oliver's first real test, a challenge that would be both academic and psychological. The boy's calm, understated manner had carried him this far, but the upcoming math club, combined with Mr. Thompson's deepening curiosity, threatened to unravel his protective layer of modesty. Each day, Oliver felt the spotlight inch closer, as though the entire classroom was a silent witness to a slow-burning trial. Little by little, it became clear that Mr. Thompson would leave no stone unturned in his quest to draw out Oliver's potential, regardless of whether the boy was ready for it or not. The inaugural session of Mr. Thompson's after-school math club took place in a small, window-lined classroom on the far side of the building. Warm afternoon sunlight streamed in, illuminating a circle of desks where a handful of students had gathered, each with a distinct look of apprehension or excitement. Oliver arrived last, hoping to slip into the group without fanfare, but Mr. Thompson greeted him with a brief nod that seemed to echo a silent challenge. Around Oliver sat 3 other students, a driven overachiever named Sophia, a diligent but easily frustrated boy called Marcus, and a sophomore, Nina, who was seeking extra credit to boost her overall GPA. Mr. Thompson wasted no time setting the tone, handing each of them a single sheet of paper labeled Challenge Problem Set Number 1. As the students scanned the problems, stunned silence took hold. The top question involved a set of polynomials that would typically appear near the end of a college-level textbook, not in high school supplementary work. Sophia's eyes widened, Marcus let out a soft groan, and Nina muttered something about how impossible it looked. Oliver, however, felt a sudden spark of exhilaration, as though someone had finally opened a door to a more satisfying realm of mathematical adventure. Fighting to maintain composure, he let his pencil hover indecisively above the page, trying not to appear too eager. Mr. Thompson encouraged them to work together, explaining that true intellectual growth came from collaboration as much as from individual skill. Sophia took the lead, suggesting a strategy for the first problem, but soon found herself stuck on a tricky algebraic manipulation. Marcus offered a few ideas, though he quickly grew impatient with the complexity. Nina scanned each line, flipping pages in her textbook to see if there were any relevant formulas. Oliver initially remained silent, hoping someone else would find a workable path. When they reached a dead end, he couldn't contain himself any longer. With careful phrasing, he proposed re-expressing one of the polynomials in factorized form, a method that seemed to remove several steps at once. Sophia eyed him curiously, impressed by how elegantly he had bypassed their earlier confusion. Marcus and Nina nodded along, relieved that progress was being made. They inched forward, problem by problem, with Oliver occasionally volunteering subtle hints that minimized his own brilliance. He would say, "I think we could try this," or "maybe if we rearrange these terms," making it appear as though he was simply sharing random ideas rather than performing near-instant calculations in his head. Mr. Thompson observed quietly, arms folded, leaning against the edge of a desk. His sharp gaze rarely left Oliver, especially after witnessing how the boy's suggestions always nudged the group toward the correct path. Every so often, Mr. Thompson would offer a hint of his own, But the real momentum clearly stemmed from Oliver's quick, nearly instinctive problem solving. By the end of the hour, they had tackled half the problem set, a feat that surprised everyone except Mr. Thompson. At the club's conclusion, Mr. Thompson dismissed the students with a reminder that they should keep practicing on their own. As Oliver gathered his things, the teacher approached and, in a low voice, praised him for his thoughtful contributions. He also hinted that Oliver had the potential to go far if he were willing to commit to more advanced competitions. Flustered, Oliver tried to downplay his achievements, stammering that he was just getting lucky or guessing. Yet Mr. Thompson's intense gaze suggested he wasn't buying the modest act. Still, he let Oliver leave with only a parting statement. "Talent is a responsibility, Oliver. Don't waste it." During the walk home, Oliver replayed the events of the afternoon, unsure whether to feel proud or worried. He had strived to keep a low profile, but he could sense Mr. Thompson's suspicion intensifying. That night, his dreams were restless, filled with sprawling equations and the echo of Mr. Thompson's words reverberating in his mind. In the days that followed, the teacher maintained a polite professionalism in regular class sessions, but continued pushing the difficulty envelope, as if coaxing Oliver to reveal himself further. Some of Oliver's classmates complained about the mounting workload and difficulty level, while Mr. Thompson insisted that it was necessary preparation for upcoming exams. The hidden truth was that he was still searching for the precise moment when Oliver's genius would fully burst forth, publicly and undeniably. All the while, Oliver struggled with an inner battle, a longing to explore mathematics at the highest level pitted against his deep-seated fear of standing out. Though he managed to keep his classmates in the dark, the small after-school group saw glimpses of his quiet competence. Sophia, in particular, began suspecting that Oliver was more than just a decent problem solver. One day, she cornered him after math club, asking if he had studied advanced textbooks or taken outside courses. Flustered, Oliver deflected her questions, feeling cornered by her curiosity. The more attention he received, the less at ease he felt. Yet despite his anxieties, each new challenge set by Mr. Thompson beckoned to Oliver like a call he couldn't ignore, pulling him deeper into a world where numbers and logic were the very language of his soul. Rumors began to circulate around Redwood High that Mr. Thompson was targeting certain students, though opinions differed on what that truly meant. Some believed he was singling out slackers with extra work, while others claimed he was trying to mold the brightest pupils into academic superstars. Oliver found himself caught in the center of the speculation, with classmates occasionally teasing him about the extra time he spent with Mr. Thompson. A few joked that he must be in trouble, whereas others accused him of being a teacher's pet. Oliver did his best to shrug it off, but the rumors only added to his anxiety, reminding him that invisibility was no longer an option. Meanwhile, the after-school math club sessions grew in intensity, with Mr. Thompson presenting increasingly intricate problems that seemed specifically designed to lure out Oliver's advanced thinking. The teacher rarely praised him openly, but the subtle nods and pointed questions made it clear who he believed should lead the group through the thorniest tangles of algebra and geometry. Sophia, Marcus, and Nina looked on with mixed feelings. Respect for Oliver's insight, but also a simmering envy that he could grasp concepts which took them hours of struggle. Oliver, for his part, wrestled with the tension between delight at solving complex puzzles and the fear that he was stepping into a spotlight he had avoided for so long. One particular afternoon, Mr. Thompson introduced a geometry conundrum involving multiple circles and tangents, which required a level of spatial reasoning that left even the most dedicated students perplexed. Oliver spent several minutes sketching the figures on scratch paper, drawing arcs and labeling intersection points with a meticulousness that bordered on artistry. Instead of solving the puzzle outright, he spoon-fed hints to the group, hoping to preserve the illusion that they were making collective progress. At first, the approach worked, but Mr. Thompson grew visibly impatient, challenging Oliver to propose a more direct line of reasoning. Trapped by the teacher's pointed demand, Oliver laid out a step-by-step proof that unraveled the entire question within minutes, leaving his peers astonished. In the stunned silence that followed, Mr. Thompson offered a simple, "well done," but his tone implied that Oliver's secret was becoming increasingly transparent. That evening, Oliver's phone buzzed with messages from classmates who had heard that he'd solved an impossible geometry problem in math club. Questions poured in. How did you figure it out? Are you secretly a genius? Why are you in regular classes if you're so smart? Overwhelmed, Oliver turned his phone on silent, wishing the chatter would just fade away. Yet a small part of him, the part that reveled in the beauty of numbers, felt gratified that someone had recognized his passion. The next day, he entered the classroom with a palpable sense of unease, aware that people were glancing his way more than usual. Mr. Thompson addressed the class as normal, but Oliver could sense a weighted look from the teacher, as though waiting for the next push that would finally force Oliver into the open. Outside of class, Mr. Thompson met with the school counselor to discuss Oliver's performance, contemplating whether to recommend him for specialized programs or advanced placement. The counselor, flipping through Oliver's file, noted that his previous grades had been good but not extraordinary enough to trigger special attention. Confusion flickered in the counselor's eyes, as Oliver's recent achievements seemed to far exceed what his record suggested. Mr. Thompson explained that Oliver might have been deliberately hiding his capabilities. The counselor looked intrigued but warned that any formal changes to Oliver's academic track would require proof, not just a teacher's hunch. This remark solidified Mr. Thompson's determination to create a situation so undeniable that even Oliver couldn't talk his way out of it. Unbeknownst to Oliver, Mr. Thompson was already planning to organize an internal school math competition as a friendly initiative to promote quantitative literacy. In reality, it was a strategic move to place Oliver in a position where he would either shine or crumble under public scrutiny. The teacher went so far as to recruit external judges, professors from a nearby community college, thus ensuring that any exceptional performance would be recognized by impartial experts. The news of this upcoming event spread quickly, arousing curiosity throughout Redwood High. Students saw it as either a chance to gain extra credit or a terrifying ordeal in which they might embarrass themselves in front of the entire school. Oliver, catching wind of the announcement through a poster in the hallway, felt his stomach lurch. Public competitions were precisely the kind of event he had hoped to avoid, an arena where people would stare and judge. He wondered if this was all a coincidence or if Mr. Thompson had orchestrated the entire affair just to corner him. Though a wave of anxiety coursed through him, Oliver also felt a small spark of exhilaration. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to embrace the extraordinary gift he had been tiptoeing around for so long. Either way, the die had been cast, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would decide whether Oliver would remain hidden or step fully into the light of his own genius. In the days leading up to the math competition, tensions ran high. Classmates who normally showed little interest in mathematics found themselves making jokes about the event, simultaneously curious and intimidated by the rumored difficulty of the problems. Mr. Thompson posted practice materials online and encouraged everyone to participate, insisting that anyone can benefit from a good mental challenge. Oliver watched the chaos unfold with growing concern. Some peers begged him for help, while others eyed him with suspicion, wondering if he was the reason Mr. Thompson had suddenly pushed for a contest. Sophia, Marcus, and Nina from the after-school club grew increasingly dependent on Oliver's guidance, privately asking him to explain formulas and theorems that seemed beyond their grasp. At home, Oliver's parents noticed a change in their son's demeanor. He appeared restless, alternating between bursts of excited problem-solving and long spells of quiet introspection. When they inquired about the upcoming competition, Oliver confessed he was torn. Part of him wanted to prove himself, to demonstrate that his aptitude for mathematics was something more than just a quiet hobby. But another part feared that standing out would bring a level of scrutiny and pressure he wasn't prepared to handle. His mother reminded him that true passion should not be hidden out of fear, while his father stressed the importance of resilience in the face of public challenges. Unsure whom to follow, Oliver spent night after night poring over the competition materials. Each equation both a source of comfort and a reminder of the spotlight looming ahead. Meanwhile, Mr. Thompson was finalizing every detail of the event. He had booked the school auditorium, arranged for refreshments, and contacted the external judges, a pair of mathematicians from the local community college. The teacher announced that this competition would be a single elimination format, featuring a series of increasingly difficult problems displayed on a large screen. Contestants would have to stand at easels on stage, solve the prompts on the spot, and ring a bell to signal completion. A wave of excitement and dread swept the student body. Even those not particularly interested in math found the concept thrilling, treating the event like a sporting match where they could cheer for their friends. Oliver felt trapped, uncertain if he should sign up or let the opportunity pass by. The sign-up sheet on Mr. Thompson's door rapidly filled with names. Some students genuinely wanted to test their mettle. Others simply craved a day out of regular classes. Knowing he couldn't avoid suspicion forever, Oliver finally penned his name among the last entries. Almost immediately, Mr. Thompson spotted it and offered a cryptic smile, as though he had expected nothing less. Word spread quickly that Oliver was officially competing, fueling rumors that he was secretly unstoppable. Some students jeered that he would choke under the stage lights, while a few supportive classmates encouraged him to show Mr. Thompson what you can really do. The day of the competition arrived faster than Oliver would have liked. The auditorium buzzed with activity as rows of seats filled with spectators, students, teachers, and even some curious parents. At the front, a temporary stage had been set up, complete with 4 white bars on adjustable stands. Oliver took a seat near the edge of the stage, scanning the crowd for any sign of his parents. He spotted them in the back row, smiling encouragingly. Mr. Thompson moved about the stage, checking the microphones and conferring with the external judges about the final problem set. A low hum of conversation enveloped the room, punctuated by occasional jokes or dramatic predictions about who would prevail. When the opening announcements ended, the competition kicked off in earnest. Names were called in pairs, and students nervously approached the boards to solve the first round of problems. The questions started relatively easy, basic algebra and geometry, causing a mix of relieved sighs and disappointed groans from the audience. Oliver, slated to compete in a later bracket, watched carefully from his seat. He tried to maintain calm, though his heart pounded at the thought of standing under the stage lights with nowhere to hide. He reminded himself of all the training he had done, all the problem sets he had mastered with ease. Still, the anxiety of public performance was a novel sensation, more taxing than any mere equation. As students advanced or were eliminated, the mood in the auditorium became electric. Some crowd favorites were knocked out by small miscalculations, leading to groans of sympathy from the audience. Others managed to scrape by with partial solutions that impressed the judges just enough. Finally, Oliver's name was called. He rose from his seat, feeling a tremor of adrenaline surge through his veins. Crossing the stage, he positioned himself in front of a whiteboard, marker in hand. Across from him stood a nervous junior who had spent days bragging that he would destroy anyone with his mental math speed. Oliver barely heard the countdown. The problem flashed on the screen, an intricate series of equations that combined trigonometry and algebraic manipulation. Time seemed to freeze as Oliver's focus honed in on the puzzle, every ounce of his being directed toward deciphering its hidden structure. In that moment, the rest of the auditorium fell away. Oliver recognized that this was exactly the kind of challenge he secretly lived for, a formidable question requiring both creativity and precision. His hand moved swiftly, lines and angles forming on the board in a carefully orchestrated dance of logic. The competing juniors scrambled to parse the first steps, occasionally glancing at Oliver's work. The judges exchanged curious looks, seeing Oliver's methodical approach. Even Mr. Thompson, standing off to the side, stared intently, as if waiting for confirmation of his long-standing suspicion. When Oliver finally placed a marker down, and rang the bell, the auditorium erupted in cheers and gasps. His solution was immaculate, a fact confirmed by the judges mere seconds later. It was the first time Oliver had ever displayed his genius in such a public arena, and the feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the competition progressed through further rounds, Oliver found himself navigating a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, the act of racing against the clock, marker in hand, felt surprisingly liberating. For the first time, he was channeling his immense capabilities without restraint, allowing numbers and symbols to flow from mind to board like a current of unbridled energy. Each victory seemed to embolden him a bit more, making him realize that perhaps his fears of standing out had kept him from fully experiencing the joy of intellectual pursuit. On the other hand, the rising attention from both peers and faculty weighed on him. He overheard classmates whispering about him in the hallways during breaks, tossing around words like prodigy and genius with a mix of awe and envy. He also saw Mr. Thompson's look of satisfaction morph into something more like expectation, as if the teacher now felt personally invested in Oliver's success. By the semifinals, only 4 students remained, including Oliver. The auditorium was alive with suspense, an undercurrent of chatter rippling through the seats. Each remaining contestant had shown exceptional skill, though none with Oliver's flair for near-instant problem-solving. Even so, Oliver grappled with nerves. His mind raced ahead, thinking about the final round, the possibility of winning, and the reaction it might provoke. Would Mr. Thompson push him even harder in class? Would fellow students resent him for outshining them so publicly? In a rare moment of doubt, Oliver wondered if he should strategically lose, sidestepping the full brunt of the spotlight. When the semifinal problem was revealed, an elaborate puzzle connecting logarithms, exponents, and a dash of number theory, Oliver hesitated just a fraction of a second before leaping into action. His opponent, Sophia, was a talented math club member known for her methodical approach. She started strongly, outlining steps with a calm self-assurance. Oliver, meanwhile, found the logical threads that tied the puzzle together, each step building upon the last. In the hush that fell over the audience, the rhythmic squeak of markers on whiteboard became almost hypnotic. The tension in the air was palpable. Then, in one bold stroke, Oliver completed the final twist of the problem, a step that allowed the entire expression to collapse into a neatly simplified answer. He rang the bell again, and Sophia paused, glancing in disbelief at his completed board. Moments later, the judges confirmed Oliver's solution, and a round of applause erupted through the auditorium. Sophia stepped away graciously, but Oliver could see the disappointment in her eyes. Despite the victorious moment, Oliver felt a pang of guilt. He admired Sophia's dedication, recognized her potential, and wished this competition weren't structured in a way that made it seem so cutthroat. But there was no turning back now. The finals loomed, pitting Oliver against a senior named Leonard, widely recognized as the top math student in the school. Leonard had placed in regional competitions before, and Mr. Thompson often praised him in class for his consistent hard work. A slight hush settled over the crowd when the matchup was announced. This was the showdown everyone had secretly hoped for. The school's established math champion versus the mysterious underdog who had rocketed to the top almost out of nowhere. While the judges took a short break to set up the final question, Oliver stood off stage trying to steady his breathing. Mr. Thompson approached, placing a firm hand on Oliver's shoulder. The teacher's voice held quiet pride as he told Oliver that no matter the outcome, he had proven himself to be a truly remarkable student. Yet Oliver could detect a flicker of something else in Mr. Thompson's eyes, ambition perhaps. It was as if the teacher was eager for Oliver to claim victory, confirming his own belief that he had discovered Redwood High's next prodigy. Oliver, uncertain how to handle the pressure, managed a grateful nod. When the finals began, an almost reverent hush fell over the auditorium. Leonard and Oliver took their places at the boards, markers poised, both wearing expressions of intense concentration. The final problem flashed onto the large screen, a monstrous collage of algebraic expressions, geometric constraints, and a cunning twist that intertwined calculus-level thinking. Gasps rippled through the audience, and even Mr. Thompson seemed momentarily taken aback by the complexity. Oliver's nerves fluttered, but once again, adrenaline coursed through him as he realized this puzzle was precisely the kind of challenge he had fantasized about for years, difficult enough to demand every bit of his mental prowess. Leonard attacked the problem systematically, outlining known formulas and established theorems. Oliver's approach, in contrast, was more intuitive and visual, leaping to connections that might not be obvious at first glance. Time stretched as they both scrawled lines of logic across their boards. The audience sat on the edge of their seats, some craning forward as though they could decipher the math from a distance. Sweat beaded on Oliver's brow, but his mind was in overdrive, weaving through the labyrinth of steps. Moments of doubt flitted in and out as he questioned each assumption, ensuring there was no hidden pitfall that could unravel his solution. Leonard was equally focused, marking his path with careful precision. Yet as the puzzle reached its densest point, Oliver discovered an elegant insight, an identity that collapsed a major segment of the problem into a simpler form. He made a note of it on the board, double-checked the logic, and felt a surge of triumph. With that key insight, the rest of the problem began to cascade into place, each step a clean reconfiguration of the previous line. The crowd sensed the shifting momentum, a low murmur stirring through the rows of seats. Leonard, noticing Oliver's sudden acceleration, frowned in concentration, trying to catch up. Finally, Oliver reached the final step, penned the answer, and rang the bell. A hush so profound fell upon the auditorium that one could hear the faint hum of the stage lights. The judges took a few moments to study Oliver's board, verifying the coherence of his solution. Then, in clear, measured voices, they announced that Oliver's logic was correct. The room erupted in an ovation, louder than any prior round. Leonard dropped his marker and applauded politely, clearly stunned but gracious in defeat. All at once, Oliver felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror flood through him. He had won the competition. He had revealed his brilliance for everyone to see. And there, at the edge of the stage, stood Mr. Thompson, clapping along with a confident smile that seemed to say, "I knew it all along." In the aftermath of the competition, Oliver's life at Redwood High transformed rapidly. Overnight, he went from being the quiet, overlooked student to the subject of endless conversations in the corridors. Some students praised him, calling him an inspiration, while others resented the shift in attention, rolling their eyes whenever his name came up. Teachers outside of math class began to take note of him, occasionally singling him out for more difficult questions or pressing him to participate in academic clubs. Even the school administration reached out, suggesting that Oliver attend specialized STEM programs to further develop his abilities. Amid this whirlwind, Oliver found himself both exhilarated and overwhelmed by the sudden notoriety. Mr. Thompson, for his part, became somewhat of a mentor figure, inviting Oliver to explore increasingly advanced topics and offering to write letters of recommendation for future opportunities. In his own way, the teacher seemed determined to harness Oliver's potential, pushing him toward scholarship competitions and deeper involvement in mathematics. Though Oliver appreciated the guidance, a lingering tension remained between them, rooted in the memory of how Mr. Thompson had forced Oliver's hand by setting up the competition. While Oliver knew he owed part of his success to Mr. Thompson's persistence, he also grappled with the sense that he hadn't been given a choice in how his talents were revealed. Yet, for all the external changes, Oliver discovered a surprising internal calm. Having finally stepped into the spotlight, he realized that the fear of being judged was often worse than the reality. Yes, there were stares and whispers, but there was also a sense of liberation in no longer hiding who he was. In the afternoons, he would still meet with the math club, though the dynamic had changed. Sophia openly acknowledged his genius, asking him detailed questions about his methods. Marcus seemed humbled but intrigued, while Nina congratulated him repeatedly, asking for tips on how to approach complex problems. Oliver tried to be as helpful and unassuming as ever, wary of coming across as arrogant. One day, Mr. Thompson pulled Oliver aside after class and handed him a sealed envelope. Inside was an application to a prestigious summer program in advanced mathematics, sponsored by a top university. Mr. Thompson explained that the deadline was approaching quickly and that Oliver should consider applying. "You have a rare gift," he said, his voice earnest. "And with gifts like yours, you have a responsibility to yourself, to those who might learn from you, and to the field of mathematics itself." Oliver studied the paperwork in his hands, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. He had never considered taking his passion this far, but now doors were opening left and right. It was up to him whether to walk through them. As the weeks passed, Oliver wrestled with the decision. The summer program was highly competitive, promising rigorous coursework and the chance to collaborate with other gifted students from around the world. It also meant stepping even further out of his comfort zone, embracing the label of prodigy that he had spent so much time avoiding. Late at night, he would lie awake, recalling how Mr. Thompson's initial forcefulness in class had led to this moment. It occurred to Oliver that what had once felt like intimidation might have been the push he needed. Eventually, with the support of his parents, Oliver submitted the application, writing a heartfelt essay about how numbers had always been his secret language. He spoke of the hidden patterns in everyday life, how the swirls of a snail's shell mirrored the Fibonacci sequence, how the angles of a bridge's supports followed geometric principles that made the structure both beautiful and strong. He confessed that he once feared being ridiculed for his interests, but had come to realize that passion, when nurtured, could be a bridge to new opportunities rather than a barrier. When he handed the completed application to Mr. Thompson, the teacher beamed with pride and congratulated Oliver on taking a step toward his future. Yet even Mr. Thompson couldn't mask his own relief. His hunch had been right all along, and the lengths he'd gone to, pushing Oliver into the limelight, were validated by the student's astonishing performance. A few weeks later, Oliver received an acceptance letter, replete with an invitation to attend the summer program on a partial scholarship. Reading through the letter, Oliver felt a tingling sense of possibility. He glanced toward the window, imagining the infinite expanse of all the formulas and proofs he had yet to discover. On his final day of regular classes that year, Oliver looked at Mr. Thompson with a mixture of gratitude and lingering questions. He approached the teacher's desk and thanked him, not only for the recommendation, but also for everything else. Mr. Thompson nodded knowingly, returning Oliver's thanks with a soft smile. There would always be a part of Oliver that remembered how it all began. A teacher who assumed he was ordinary, a forced attempt to solve an impossibly difficult equation, and the slow unveiling of a genius that neither of them could have predicted. Standing in that classroom, the quiet hum of the overhead lights and the faint scent of chalk in the air, Oliver realized that sometimes the very thing you dread, the spotlight, can become the catalyst for your greatest growth. With that, he stepped out into the hallway, ready to embark on the next stage of a journey that had been set in motion by a simple, yet life-altering equation. If this story inspired you, don't forget to leave your comment and share this video so more people can discover the power of believing in themselves and in others. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time